All right, hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Magduit and today we're going to be going over my brand new FL Studio patcher preset called Phat V2. Now, if you guys know me, you all know that I have been refining my Phat rack over the years in a number of different DAWs, and I have returned to FL Studio. I've been producing more in FL Studio, and one of the things that has kept me uninspired to work in FL Studio is not having all of my familiar tools that I have developed and refined in Ableton. So today I present to you the Phat V2, which is my version of the FL Studio. It's my version of the Ableton Phat rack that I designed, but ported over to FL Studio. So now we're basically relying on solely the stock FL Studio plugins to create and emulate a similar effect to the Ableton Phat rack. But one thing that I will say is that this Phat rack is not the same. I would argue that there are some things that are better and some things that are different and potentially maybe not worse per se. It's just there's some aspects that I removed, and then there are other aspects that I added. And again, I made sure that the tool is fire. So without further ado, let's go into all the different knobs, what they do, what it sounds like, how I like to use it, and maybe I'll show off a couple of the presets that I will be including with this rack as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. So before we get started, I actually just want to show you all that I did create a manual for this. So whenever you all do download this, feel free to check out in the folder. There is this manual. It goes over all of the controls and what they do, how to use it, I say sort of how to use it because obviously I've got some little tips and tricks here, but nothing too crazy. But anyway, so you've got lots of information on how to use it. And then I also included a signal flow layout, so that way you kind of understand what goes into what and how the preset is designed, right? Like I want to show you guys like what goes into what, right? So that's obviously there. And then of course we got some fun little artwork that I made. But regardless, the big thing here is that this will help you understand how to use it outside of this video if you feel you want to read more on how to use it. So I'm actually going to reopen this, and let's just keep this up on my other monitor here so I can reference it as we go through these controls. Okay, so to start off, we're going to go over the main knob, the Phat knob. So this knob is obviously the central part of the processor. This is the knob that is going to fatten up your sound. It's going to add those extra harmonics, bring up the level a little bit, and essentially just tastefully make your sound more full, okay? So obviously this knob is pretty aggressive, and I'm just going to be using this patch that I made. It's just a bass that I've worked on in Vital. Very simple bass as well, just a little sine wave with some harmonics on top with a low pass filter. Very subtle amounts of saturation and a little OTT, nothing crazy. And actually, maybe we'll turn off the OTT. We'll keep it the way it is. The OTT obviously helps. All right, so the Phat knob we've got here, as you can see, does a really good job at fattening up the entire sound in a very tasteful way. So it kind of takes it from this sort of just weak sound to a fat sound. All right, now, a knob that is imperative to be aware of is this little trim knob next to the Phat knob. Now, this trim knob is new to the Phat V2 in FL Studio. And what this lets you do is essentially set the threshold for the fatness. And the reason why this is helpful and important is something that I noticed with FL Studio's Maximus, which is what I'm relying on very heavily to create this fatness, is that if you drive it a certain way, you can get saturation and harmonics from the compression. So this trim knob is essentially a trim for the threshold that determines that sort of distortion that you're getting out of the Maximus. So the thing here is when I have it up all the way and play something, let me just get a note here. You can hear how we're getting a little bit of saturation. And let's say we wanted to kind of set the threshold so that when we have it up all the way, we know that it can't distort. Well, you can now adjust this threshold to be a little bit lower, you know, because it's kind of like a limiter, right? Like we're boosting it into a limiter. So by reducing it, we are removing saturation or lowering the volume. And then by increasing it, we're like boosting into the threshold, right? So right? And now we're kind of refining that fatness to be a little bit more subtle. Whereas if we have this turned up, we can actually get, right, like really, really aggressive distortion if we wanted to. So again, super important knob, definitely new to the Mag Phat V2 in FL, really excited about it. And I'm a huge fan of that. So that is the trim knob. Now, we're going to go over the next big part of the Phat Rack that is, I would argue, the next major part of the loudening and fattening up of your sound, and that is the push knob. Now, this, or I'm sorry, not knob, but fader. Now, this fader is used to essentially add a little bit of saturation, but mainly bring up the volume and level of your sound to whatever tasteful level you're desiring, right? So by using this, if we boost this with the fat already up slightly, you know, we're kind of just making a very firm movement in the upwards direction without doing too much change to the quote-unquote fattening of the sound, right? Now, obviously, we are going to add a little bit of saturation, but this feels less like compression saturation and more like tube saturation, right? So this is a little bit more of a warmer kind of almost tape style of saturation. Thus the idea push, right? We're kind of pushing the sound into almost like a tape. We're kind of loudening it in that way. At least that's the way I like to think about it. So and again, the level of aggression you want to be here as far as how much you want to push all these things is to taste. But one thing I will say is that the Phat Rack side of the design are meant to be pretty aggressive. You know, you can get them as fat. You could put it on pretty much anything and you will be able to get that thing fat, you know. So I like to make sure to give everyone the ability to be as fine-tuned or as aggressive as they want. So just be aware that things like this push fader are going to feel very strong, right? Like even this subtle movement was more than enough. So on to the next knob. So the focus knob is the next one we're going to look at here. And this knob essentially shapes and sculpts the stereo image. Now, what it does is it sculpts it in a way that focuses the instrumentation that's going through this rack. So the idea here is if you have a pretty wide sound and you want it to feel a little bit more forward, a little bit more direct, a little bit more maybe even mono slightly, this is what this knob is used for. So on basses, this can be incredibly helpful, or on anything you want to feel more fat. It can be incredibly helpful because, again, you're adding stability in the form of stereo control, right? So by bringing this up, you can hear how it starts to feel more focused versus, you know, this feels a little bit wider, but then as we bring this up, right, you can hear how it also kind of removes some mud slightly. Again, focusing, right? The idea here is we are focusing. So one thing that's cool about this as well is I have another fun little knob here that is not in any of my other Phat Racks, the spread knob. Now, this is something that I was able to achieve because of FL Studio Spreader. And basically what we're doing here is we're focusing it, and then what you can do, if you so choose, is bring up this spread knob, which will actually spread the harmonics that are not being focused. So the unfocused frequencies are able to be almost spread apart if you so desire. So this kind of allows you to add stereo width to the stuff that is not being focused, which is very helpful if you want to kind of create a discrepancy between the focused elements and the not focused elements to, again, kind of create more of a contrast between the two, which can create a more controlled stereo environment, right? It's just giving you the more control over how you want this stereo focusing to feel. So what's cool about this is, obviously, let's just play it here. So once we get it focused, we can then maybe add some stereo information, right? And on a sound like this that was very mono, we're actually creating stereo information. So the other thing that's really helpful about this is on a sound that is maybe very mono, you can utilize this with the focus knob to impart some stereo information that is obviously mono compatible, and you know, it's not going to affect your sub in a negative way, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, this focus knob, you know, we can lower the focus and get the spread if we want, and we could actually just use this as a way to get stereo information. You You know, now obviously it's very unfocused, but it's just something that we can do. So it's just a very, very powerful tool here to be able to not only focus, but also tastefully sculpt our stereo information. So that is the focus knob and the spread knob. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the next knob here below the focus knob is the distort knob, and this knob is, as you would expect, a distortion knob, and we're just, very subtly distorting whatever it is that we're putting through this rack here. So the idea is, we're aiming for tasteful grit, adding harmonics, definitely creating more of a full sound, but in a way that is as transparent as possible. So obviously there are levels to this, of course. Obviously you can get aggressive. But as you can see, even when it's up all the way, it's adding harmonics, but it's not doing it in a way that's really changing the fundamental energy of the sound, right? And that was the goal here, is to allow you and myself to add harmonics, but in a way that's like very transparent, right? Because the goal here is we don't want to destroy the sound. We could do that before the rack if we wanted to, but the rack is designed to make it fat. So this is a nice way to add some fatness. Now, something to mention here is I have a DC filter button. This is something, again, completely new to the FL Studio version of this Phat rack that allows us to enable a DC offset filter, which is very, very important if you're having some level of low frequency mud. It's one of those things where these types of filters can help remove subfrequency rumble, which again is maybe not always there, but having the option to remove it is incredibly powerful. And sometimes it's worth just A/Bing this, seeing if it's, even worth doing or not. But by enabling this, you will enable the DC offset filter. So let's just see what it sounds like with and without, and we'll kind of just ride with whatever sounds the best. And I think with the filter enabled here, it feels cleaner. It feels firmer, more sturdy, more focused. So I'm glad we had that option. But anyway, on to the next set of knobs here. Okay, so next up we have the space knob. The space knob is designed to add space in a very tasteful way, in a very subtle way. So a lot of the times what I've realized on main instruments or instruments that need to be fatter, you are often wanting to add a certain level of stereo information to kind of fill up the entire frequency space. Now, we already had our focus knob with the spread, which can help, but that's kind of a different sort of feeling than a space. So that kind of stereo information is truly kind of like stereo information. Like we're adding almost stereo width to the sound. It's almost like we're creating more of a XY coincident pair microphone recording than a mono microphone recording, right? But with space, we're actually creating an environment or a room with reflections, etc., that this stereo information is bouncing off of, right? And that is something that is important on sounds that we want to make fatter. So this knob is designed to allow you to add that type of space without destroying things like subfrequencies or the context of the instrument in the mix, etc., right? The goal here was to create a space knob that is, again, subtle, but felt, right? So let's go ahead and just hear what this sounds like. You can see it's very subtle, right? Very, 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 very subtle. But the idea here is that it creates the perfect the perfect space. And of course you can add as much or as little as you want. But the whole idea here is it creates this organic, natural feeling that is sometimes not felt when we're making these sounds very loud, right? So, or fat, I should say. But the idea here is with the space, you're able to achieve this natural feeling while still pushing it. And of course, we have a little sub knob here, little sub control knob, and it is the width knob of this space. So what's even more amazing is we can actually control the width of this space in the context of the Phat rack. So what this lets us do is really get refined and give us tons of control over exactly the way we want the space and the width to be. So for example, in this context, I'd like to maybe make it a little bit wider. right? And now, right, you see how it's very dry without it, and then with it, very, 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 very subtle. And that's how I like to use it personally, is just basically to add this gentle feeling of natural space. But again, we've got all kinds of ways we can control it. And even if you push this to the extremes, it will still work on your tracks. As you could hear, even when we had it up all the way. But it still works, right? Obviously, we're getting a little bit out of control in some ways, but it does still work, okay? It's just a little bit weirder as we get further up. It becomes more of a creative tool, right, than a mixing tool at that point. But anyway, so that is the space knob. On to the next one. Okay, so the next knob we're going to look at is the global width knob. Now, the global width knob is, as you would expect, just a really simple and easy way to control the global width of everything in the Phat rack. It's pretty helpful just because sometimes whenever you're finished and you're looking at this in the context of the mix, there will be times where you're like, it's still just a little too wide, or maybe it's just a little too mono. So what you can do here is take this knob and just perfectly place it. So it's not going to be very easy to understand in the context of this video, but just know in the context of the mix, this knob is going to be your best friend, because this knob is going to be what allows you to relate this instrument to the other instruments in a way that makes sense. In relation to the stereo image, of course, we're trying to make everything feel connected. So maybe we can mono it ever so slightly, right? And what's nice about this is we can also engage this little sub button here. And what this does is it will mono the sub frequencies that are determined by the sub crossover, which we are going to go over in just a minute here. But basically, this button is super helpful, so that way you can still adjust the global width, but then you're leaving alone those sub frequencies, which we know are often needed to stay in mono, right? Or we want to retain that mono stability. So this button just lets you kind of do that, right? So you can just kind of enable that, and now you can, you can go as wide as you want, and it still won't touch the sub, as you can see down here. See how it removes the side information from the sub frequencies there. So yeah, super handy. So let's go ahead and maybe just make this a little bit more mono, and we'll mono the sub frequencies as well. All right, cool. On to the next knob. Okay, so this next knob is the sub LX over. Now, that stands for the sub limiter crossover. And this is an extremely important knob as it relates to the sub limiter, which we are going to be getting into shortly. But the crossover itself is more or less, I would say, more important because it relates to multiple tools, okay? So not only does it relate to the sub limiter, but it relates to the global width. So the idea here is you are able to set up the sub mono frequency as well as the crossover for the sub limiter frequency simultaneously, right? So whatever this frequency is, it will be... Your sub limiter is essentially going to be following it, as well as your global width will be following it. And I was unable to, unfortunately, be able to set it up in a way where you can see the frequencies, but often I'm doing this by ear anyway, so I just didn't feel like it was hugely a big issue. But if you're ever wondering what the crossover is, you can go into here and you can just go into your sub L frequency splitter, okay? And you can actually see the crossover here, or you could go into the sub limiter here, and you can see the crossover here as well, okay? So right now, by default, it's essentially 120 hertz. The frequency splitter here is linear phase. I'm not sure about the sub limiter, but it should all be kosher as far as working in the context of your mix. But just be aware that because this is linear phase, there's going to be a slight little bit of latency imparted when you use this tool, okay? So the little bit of latency you might experience is because we are relying on linear phase crossovers, which is to ensure that our sine waves and our low frequencies stay phase coherent and phase compliant. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to this next button here, and that is the sub LX over on button. Now, this button enables the sub limiter. So this is the turning on and off the sub limiter. Now, by default, it is off. So by default, you will not be limiting your sub. But when you turn this on, it is set to 120 hertz by default, which is usually most sub frequencies are below 120. Technically, it's 100 and below, but I figured 120 would be a little bit more, safe. So basically, all your sub frequencies will 100% be by default within this limiter. But of course, you can go and change this crossover to whatever you want. But yeah, so by default, we have this limiter enabled or disabled, but when we turn it on, it's going to be set to a 0 ceiling, a 0 decibel ceiling threshold, and we can lower that ceiling. Now you can hear by default, this is a very, well, we'll say subtle limiter. Obviously, it's a limiter, so it's not subtle. But it is more subtle than the limiter options that we have available to us. So by default, I noticed that the sub limiter, as I had it set up, was really, really nice, and I liked how gentle it was. But it was a little bit too gentle. I wanted to be able to still have that option if I really wanted to like just slam everything down to whatever a ceiling I want, right? So this one is a gentle limiter. But by clicking on this little 2x button down here, it actually enables a secondary limiter that is after this one that is much more aggressive. And this one, as you can see here, as I play it, you can really hear this is a much more aggressive limiter because that sub just disintegrates. So to compare the two, this is with the 2x, right? And then this is with the not 2x. Right, so you can see how without the 2x, you can kind of gently sort of nudge your sub down a little if you need to. And then with the 2x, you could be like, all right, we're putting you where we want you, bud. So, so that is the sub limiter. Those are all the things there. As you can see, the fader is super helpful as well, just for setting that ceiling. So yeah, on to the next few things here. Okay, so the last few things here we're kind of going to go over in quick succession because they're semi-related, but we'll start with the OTT time knob. Now, or fader, I should say, or slider, I guess. But this OTT time slider is used to essentially adjust the times of all of the OTTs inside of the Phat Rack. Now, because I'm using Maximus as my OTTs, the attack and release times are very different in the way that they function in comparison to any other OTT compressor. Most other OTT compressors have a level of softness when you start reaching certain types of attacks and releases, whereas what I'm noticing with Maximus is it is a little bit more surgical, which means that if you go to extremes, it becomes a little bit more unpredictable. Well, and sometimes that's good. I guess it is predictable. That's probably not the right word to use, but it becomes less smooth. We'll say that. And the reason why is because when we go to shorter and shorter attack times, we start to get more almost, it's almost like distortion. It's hard to describe it. But same with it. I'll show you exactly what happens. Okay. But long story short, to the left is to lower the attack and releases. To the right is to raise the attack and releases. Okay. So this will slow everything down. This will speed everything up. And the timbre is going to be affected greatly depending on how you have this set. By default, it is set to normal settings that I have on my other Phat Racks, but if you want to mess with this, you can. So let's go ahead and just see what this sounds like. So you can hear on this, we lose a little bit of that initial saturation. And then when you start to go more aggressively into the right, you don't really get much of a timbral change, but on my end, and this is going to be hard to experience on your end, but on my end, when I'm hitting the button, it definitely adds a little bit of latency. So in my opinion, this really just slows that attack down so much that it almost turns it into more of like a smooth onset. So it's just a totally different way that OTT timers react, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of that. Now, the cool part about this is it still does give you a lot of control over how the OTTs react, and it is still incredibly powerful. It just doesn't function the exact same way as other OTTs, which is arguably better. Because at the end of the day, if I want to grab a regular OTT, I could always grab the free Serum OTT, right? With the standard time and all that, right? But this is the Phat V2, right? This is designed to be a little bit more surgical and, more importantly, a little bit more, well, dare I say, fattening. So on to the next slider here. So the next slider we have is the OTT crossover slider. Now, this is, as you would expect, related to the low band crossover inside of the OTT. Now, by default, this is set to, I believe, 120. And if you aren't sure, you can actually go in here and look at the OTTs, any of them, and you can actually just go to where this low crossover is and hover over it. But yeah, it's set to 120 by default, which is pretty standard across the entire rack. So by default, you're going to get all your subs going, one band, and then all your mids and highs going to another. Now, you can adjust this. So the cool part about this is the more mids you let in, the more balanced your sound will start to feel. The way this is kind of designed is the mids will kind of get smiley faced a little bit. So you're going to have a little bit of sub boost for sure, and then a little bit of high boost for sure. But more often than not, the mids shouldn't be moved around too much. Obviously, they're going to come up, but in comparison to the other two, they're not going to come up as much. But if you bring this to the right and start letting in more mid-range information into that sub band, well, it starts to kind of let more of those mid-range frequencies be brought up in the same way that the sub band is being brought up. And what I have found is this allows you to create kind of like a balancing between the smiley face, right? So you can, maybe add more mids if you need to, or take some away by going back to the setup as it is now, right? So the other reason why this is incredibly handy is because of the button below it. So the button below it is the sub into OTT button, okay? Now, what does this mean? This determines whether or not the sub is bypassing all of the OTTs or going through all of the OTTs. Now, the reason why this is important is because of how it affects the rest of the sound. Whenever you have the sub going through the first OTT, that means when it enters the second OTT, there will be sub as well. But if you are bypassing all of the OTTs, what that means is your sub is now no longer entering the OTT chain. And because of that, what ends up happening is you end up having, well, obviously a clean sub, but also you have more control over the mids and highs with regards to the fat controls, okay? So essentially what that lets you do is use the push knob as a way to sort of just bust everything into the fat rack, really bring up the sub, all that kind of stuff, and then focus more on the fat knob as a way to sort of control the highs and mids. So it's just a very handy way to sort of just decide whether or not you want your sub to be fattened and to be a part of the whole experience or not, right? And, depending on your instrument, you may want to keep it on, you may want to turn it off. But let's go ahead and just listen to what these two things sound like. I just wanted to go over them first before we just heard them because I'm going to be using them in tandem here. So let's go ahead and just hear what it sounds like. Obviously, this OTT time knob, you don't want to really move while you're playing stuff as well, because the goal here is to just kind of set the time and then forget it. And I think that's just because of how Maximus works. So I think if you were to automate this anyways, Maximus would probably be doing this regardless, right? So it's just something to keep in mind. But anyway, so we got that. Let's get the sub OTT turned on and off. Let me show you guys what that sounds like. So you can hear how now that the sub is being run through cleanly, it's obviously much quieter because it's not being fattened as much, right? So let's turn off all the fattening, maybe even reduce the distortion a little bit as well, right? So now we've kind of got it back to baseline. And if we push this more, see how you're able to actually get the mids and highs to be brought up way further, and then the sub is not distorted and nasty, right? So like, but then obviously if we were to try and do the same with the sub, you can hear it just kind of is not. I mean, obviously, maybe that's a creative choice you might want to go with, but it's not clean, right? So the big thing here is we can retain the cleanliness, but have control in the way that we want, right? So that is everything. That is Phat V2, okay? It's got a lot of different tools to help you bring your sounds into a brighter and fuller light. And I look forward to seeing you guys use it. I know I have been using it and enjoying it all the time. One little knob that I'm not going to forget about, but I'll just quickly mention, is the high pass knob. I was going to actually go over it, but I mean, come on, you guys. It's a high pass, all right? It's at the end of the chain, too, if you want to look at the signal flow. But anyway, I appreciate every single one of you for watching this video and taking the time to learn about my Phat Rack here. I hope you all enjoy and look forward to some new fun things coming out with FL Studio in the near future. I have lots of exciting things planned, and yeah. With all that being said, keep making music, or else. Peace.